out your spirit, pour out your spirit.
Reviewing the outpouring for your refreshing and infilling.
Pour out your spirit, pour out your spirit, pour out your spirit on me.
Viewers, good morning, good lunchtime, good day, whatever time of the day you are going to be viewing this program. It's a joy and a privilege once again to come into your presence and share with you and minister to you the Word of God. Today I am going to be speaking about Jacob the Great. I recently did the book of Revelations, and it was as if I just could not speed through. I really went through at a very slow pace, and then sometimes, rereading some of the areas that I read already. And I'm always fascinated by quite a number of different Bible personalities. But there is something that is really so great and awesome about Jacob. So today we are going to be looking at the life of Jacob. We are going to be looking at some of his attributes and see what we could take from his life, how we could glean from some of his strengths. Jacob was a mighty and powerful man. A lot of times we may just, when we hear Jacob, we may remember the part where he outsmart his father to get the blessing, or we may remember how, he was a trickster. But really and truly, those aspects of his personality, they are so small and minute when compared to, his life on a whole, when compared to all the other things that Jacob was involved in. In the book of Genesis, Jacob and his life and the life of his sons, they span from Genesis 25 straight through to Genesis 50. And we are going to be looking at a few of these areas, starting with his birth. And of course, we will end with his death and touch on some of the things in between. So in the book of Genesis, chapter 25, reading from verse 23, this is when Jacob was born. It says, "And the Lord said unto her," which was Jacob's mother, because she was having a really challenging pregnancy, so much so that she inquired of the Lord because there was a great struggle that was going on the inside of her. "And the Lord said unto her, Two nations are in thy womb, and two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, and the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, they were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over like an hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them." So we see from the very birth of this child, and even before the birth, this was an active child. This was a powerful and a great personality, so much so that as he was coming out, he just lay hold his hand on the heel of his brother. And this in itself showed forth the type of man that he was going to become. Some of the attributes of Jacob that I just listed, I will share with you. He was hardworking. He was a man of prayer. He was a good father. He was a submissive person. He understood giving. He He was very determined. He was strong-willed. He was prophetic. He had a futuristic way about his whole life. He was, despite his early days where, he was a trickster, he really turned out to be a very honest person. He had tenacity. He had persistence. He had a plan for his life and for many things that he did. And sometimes we have a plan, but we do not put that plan into action, or we don't make things happen. But Jacob was the person, he had a plan, he was a hard worker, and Jacob made things happen. Hence the reason that we can call him a great man. We all know the part about his early days with his brother Esau, and then how his mom had him to pretend to be his other brother and trick his father and all that. But after that, we begin to see a change in Jacob's life. Imagine this man was such a great man that he worked 7 years with his uncle Laban for his daughter's hand in marriage. He saw her, he fell in love with her, and he worked 7 years. And the very trickery of his life, he ended up getting into a tricky position where he did not get the one he wanted, and he had to work another 7 years for the one he really wanted. So that in itself is a great measure of persistence, is a great measure of knowing what you want, but not just knowing what you want, but working towards that goal and not stopping until that goal is accomplished. So we see that aspect of Jacob. Jacob, when I look at his entire life, and maybe I would encourage you to, to just read it at your convenience. That would be from Genesis 25 to Genesis 50. In that whole discourse with Jacob's life, we had two great, I would call it great parties or great processions or a display of Jacob's greatness. So as we continue looking at the life of Jacob, we look a bit at his praying life. Jacob understood how it was to pray and to cry out to God. We have two situations where Jacob, on his way, he got to a certain place and he built an altar, and he took a stone for a pillow, and there he lay his head, and he saw the angels of the Lord ascending and descending, and his words were, God was in this place and I knew it not. So Jacob had a real close relationship with God. He prayed, he spent time in prayer, he consulted God, he had the wisdom and the strategies for life from God. There is another instance in his prayer life when he was returning, and he was really afraid of what would happen with Esau, because remember, Esau wanted to kill him for outsmarting him, but many years would have passed. He had, he had 2 wives, he had the 2 concubines, and 12 children, his 12 sons plus his daughter, and he was heading back, and he was really intimidated. He was afraid. And there again we see where he had all his family and everybody cross over the river, and he alone stayed behind and prayed that whole night. The whole night he wrestled and wrestled and wrestled and prayed and sought the Lord, so much so that when the morning was breaking, the angel of the Lord, he said to him, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And the angel said, the day breaketh, that he have to leave. And the angel of the Lord touched his hip, and he had a limp from then on. But Jacob knew what it was to be steadfast, to be unmovable, to be persistent, to continue in prayer all night. And probably that's where we get that aspect of all-night prayer meetings, you know, from Jacob. He would have been the first one that gave us that as an example, to tarry until you have that breakthrough at the breaking of day. Jacob was also a very submissive husband. He ruled his household, yes, but he was also submissive. There's one instance where one of his, I think it was Leah, his first wife, where, you know, they didn't have any relations because, of course, he eventually got Rachel, and, you know, he was hardworking and all that. And she bought some of, her son had these mandrakes, and Rachel wanted mandrakes, so she sold them so that she will have that night with Jacob. And when Jacob came from the field, she met Jacob and she said to him, "You will sleep with me tonight because I have sold my son's mandrakes for you to spend that night with me." And there was nowhere in that whole account where Jacob queried, he made any objections or anything, but he just did as she said. And he, you know, you look through his relationship with all the different wives and the naming of his children. He was a family man. He was a family man, and God used him greatly. He had those 12 sons, and hence we have now the 12 tribes of Israel based on Jacob's 12 sons. Jacob was also a man who had strategies when Laban was really outsmarting him and changing his wages many times and concocting all manner of evil against him. He came up with that strategy with the speckled and the spotted animals, where he had them to mate by when they come up to drink with the water, and he used the perpolas and made certain images so that when they come to mate, they will see the speckle, and so when they mate, they will bring forth young ones that look speckled and spotted. And that in itself was a whole strategy that Jacob used. So he was strategic in his operations. He was a man of prayer. He was submissive. He was a family man. He was hardworking. But one of the great parts about, and I want you to picture this as I share it, when he was heading back to Esau, he made a whole big arrangement where he had each of his wives with their children and his herd and his men and all the animals, everything. And he had that whole procession lined off in the order of, you know, of they being close to him. And then he had the last one, which was closest to him, would have been Rachel and her 2 sons. And that procession is what Esau would have met on his way to Jacob. Also in his giving, he decided he's going to send a gift to his brother Esau, because a gift, as we know, would always make room for you. And again, this was a strategy that he used just to make peace and to have the reuniting of those 2 brothers, to have it as a peaceable one. He sent a whole set of animals and all different produce, so much so that when Esau met him, he said, "What is the meaning of all of this?" And then he went on to share with him that God had blessed him so much, and, you know, he was just giving him a portion of that blessing. When he met him, and, you know, they fell on each other's neck and they kissed each other, and Jacob was also a very humble man, because he bowed down to him and he referred to him as my Lord. And also he had each of his wives and children pass before Esau and bow before him in that same humility that he demonstrated to his brother. So that whole sight, you know, it was a great time. It was a great sight to behold. It was well planned, well orchestrated, And you know, when I try to picture it, I say this is just so awesome. This man was truly a great man. As we continue to look at his life, when Esau said to him, well, I will accompany you, and you know, I will make sure that you're safe and, you know, carry you over. And he said no, the children are young, and you know, he don't want to rush them and have them go at a faster pace. So he said to him, that's okay, you go ahead, we will come behind and we will set our own pace. And again, that was another strategy, because yes, they came together, they met each other, they mend the broken places, and you know, they reunited nicely. But it wasn't for him to stay there, it was for them to continue in their separate lives. So again, we see him being strategic. We see him giving so much to his brother. His brother didn't want to take it because he said, I have, you know, so much of my own, but he insisted that the brother must take the gift, and eventually we saw where his brother took the gift. So we looked at his prayer life, we looked at his giving, we looked at his strategy, we looked at the fact that he was a family man. He knew how to operate. He understood how to make peace. When Laban came after him in search of the gods, and of course he didn't tell Laban, and that in itself was another strategy. He didn't tell him that he was leaving, because of course he would have wanted to stop him or want to search the animals and all that. So he left in secret. But when he came up to Laban, again Jacob used strategies, and you know, there was peace among them, and Laban eventually departed in peace, and Jacob continued on his way. So he was really, despite the fact that his beginning was like a trickster, he was a real great man. But one of the areas that I also love a lot is when the people in the area where he had gone to, they had high respect for him, and his daughter, his 12-son sister Dana, she had gone out, and the prince in that area, he had, you know, he fell in love with her so much, and he, long story short, he raped her, and her brothers got to find out, and they were so angry at what happened. And what happened really was not a good thing. And what the brothers do, they conspired, and they really let those guys from Shushan have it. They had them all agree to be circumcised if the prince wanted to marry the sister. And when they were all circumcised, and by the third day when they were sore, they came upon them and they slew them and they fought with them. And you know, Jacob rebuked his sons. You know, he said to them that, you know, you did, even though they took advantage of your sister, how you dealt with them, you know, it wasn't you. You've exposed us in this strange land. So Jacob was very involved. He was very involved in everything. We also saw coming down to the end when there was the challenge, where there was the famine in the land, and the famine was so great. Jacob, we saw his decisiveness. He gathered his sons. He said, listen, I understand there is food in Egypt. I want you to go down. And it wasn't just to go down and beg, but he was wealthy, because he sent down a great portion of money and other dried stuff that they would have. And he sent that down so that they could purchase food. We're not going to get into the part, you know, with Joseph, because that's a whole next message. But as we continue to focus on Jacob, even when they came back and they showed how they were treated, and you know, they told their father that the man put all the money back into their sacks. And Jacob, in his honesty, when he had to send them the next time, he said, take money to buy new food, but also what was sent back by accident, maybe it was an accident, take that back, you know. And it throughout that whole encounter, it showed all the varying characteristics of Jacob. He built many altars, many prayer places unto God. And in the end now, when the famine became even so great, and when Joseph was revealed to his brothers, and his father, Joseph sent for his father and all of his siblings, and he sent chariots and wagons and everything, and Jacob went to meet, to be reunited with his son Joseph. And while they lived in Egypt, again we saw the greatness of the man. He went before Pharaoh and he prayed for Pharaoh. He prophesied to Pharaoh. He blessed Pharaoh. And when his days were coming to an end and it was time for him to die, it was, well, I shouldn't even say it was as if he knew that time was coming, because he was sick and Joseph came to visit him, and he, being the father, the great man that he was, he blessed Joseph 2 sons, and again he blessed them in such a way where he crossed the hand, where the younger, just in the case with him where the younger was going to be blessed more than the older one. Joseph was saying no, but Jacob was a strong father. He knew what he was doing. He told Joseph, I know what I'm doing. And he did that blessing. And we further went on to see where Jacob called all of his sons, every single one of them, and he blessed each one individually, giving each one a prophetic word, saying what their future was going to be, what they would be like, and he blessed all of them. And when he was finished blessing them, it was close to time for him to die. But there was one other point that I needed to bring. That was when Joseph came to visit him. Now he was sick and he was lying down. And that verse said that he strengthened himself. You could imagine this man is sick. He is on his deathbed. But his son is coming, and he strengthened himself and he pulled himself up. He was such a strong man that even in dying, his strength was still with him. He strengthened himself, he pulled himself up, and he spoke to Joseph, and he prophesied to Joseph's sons, his sons, one by one. And the word of God says that after that he pulled up his feet and he departed earth. He went to be with his fathers. What a great man. What a great man. He was so great in his life that even in his death, in his burial, he was great from the womb straight to the tomb, because inside he was fighting and they were wrestling. He came out from the womb holding his brother's heel, and on his way now to the tomb, we see in chapter 50 the kind of burial, the kind of funeral service that this great man had. He was embalmed according to the ways in which the Egyptians did the embalming, that lasted for 40 days. After those 40 days, there was a 70 days of mourning, right, where they were just mourning for the life of Jacob. And then Joseph went to Pharaoh to ask Pharaoh to permit him to honor his father's wishes, because his father wanted to be laid to rest with his fathers, Isaac, and his grandfather, Abraham. And that request was granted. And it wasn't just for Joseph to go and his family, but no. In that going to the burial place, you could imagine all the servants of Pharaoh's house, all the elders in the land. And I mean, Egypt was a great place. So for it to have all the elders and all the servants of Pharaoh's house and the elders in the land, that would have been a lot of people. And then you add all the elders, and then you add all the elders in the house and all the servants, and then you add to that now the whole family of Jacob, all his sons and the younger ones. Some of the children remained, but most of the family went up, and they went off to this burial place where Jacob requested to be buried. And they went up with, the word of God says they went up with a great and a very sore lamentation. And they mourned after they went up to that place in the field, the burial place. They had a lamentation and they had mourning and grieving for 7 days. So much so that the people in the neighboring places, they were astonished at the huge and great funeral service, the lamentation, the crying, the whole entourage for such a great man. I don't think anywhere throughout the Bible, from Genesis right through to Revelation, it depicts any funeral service like that. Jacob was a man like no other. He was truly, truly, truly a great man. And you know, we can pull a little from his life. We can look at his giving and we can pattern our giving after him. We can look at his prayer life. You know, there are many prayers in that whole account of his life where he prayed to God, where he cried out to God, so much so that the Lord changed his name from Jacob to Israel. We can look at his persistence, his discipline, his hard working, his diligence, the way in which the man was strategic and he had a plan. He was futuristic. We can also look at his humility, the way in which he knew he was wrong and he bowed down to his brother. He blessed his brother. We can also look at the way in which he was a great leader, a great and mighty leader. This guy, Jacob, he was also obedient unto God. Whatever God told him, when the word of the Lord came to him, it was time for him to leave where he was with his uncle. He arose and he left. Whatever the Lord told him to do, he was obedient and he did it. So we have been privileged to just have the account of the life of this great man. You know, sometimes when we say when we get to heaven, we want to meet Abraham, we want to see this one, we want to meet this other one. And we all would have our favorite Bible personalities. But of the great ones, I think Jacob really stands as a great father. And hence the name Israel. Israel is the name of that nation, the place where God, the people that God called his own. His grandfather, he came from the loins of Abraham, which was a friend of God, which was also obedient. So all those characteristics of his father and his grandfather, we see it demonstrated in Jacob. And despite his beginning where he was trickery, his end was great and wonderful. So I really hope that you enjoyed and you were blessed and you were inspired by today's sharing. And I challenge you, in your spare time, go and read from Genesis 25 to Genesis 50 and really take your time with pen and paper. Look at the life of Jacob and see where you can be blessed and also improve your life. I was blessed, I was inspired, and I decided I'm sharing it with you today. Today's program, Jacob the Great, from the womb to the tomb. Blessings. Shalom.
Pour out your spirit, pour out your spirit.
Reviewing the outpouring for your refreshing and infilling.
Pour out your spirit, pour out your spirit, pour